Welcome. Tonight, we're plunging into the darkest corners of Reddit. Dim the lights, steady your nerves, and let's begin. I am a feeder, and it is killing the love of my life. I, 36M, have been with my wife, 42F, for 10 years now. We were always on the kinky side, and she was always pretty big herself, though not unhealthily, morbidly so. And this, for me, was always a very big turn-on. On our honeymoon, when, it must be said, I truly began to fall, unequivocally, in love with her. It came to be that her size, at this time only modestly large, was now not enough to satisfy me. I have always felt ashamed of myself sexually, always felt that my desires were abnormal and considered by many to be disgusting. It began with me ordering her an extra large pizza on pizza night. She only ever ate large, without her knowledge. She, naturally, grew larger with time, and this excited me greatly. Our love life was the best it had ever been. It made me feel truly alive, completely satisfied. The demon in me, I thought, had been calmed, but I was wrong. It progressed further. I started, with lunch every day, buying a dozen donuts from the local donut shop to share. Then I would eat only one or two and leave the rest to her. When she told me that she was full, which she did many times in the beginning, I would tell her how much it had cost me and how I worked so hard to provide for her and how it would be such a shame if they all went to waste. Then she, out of guilt, would finish them. She naturally got even larger, and our love life got even better. After some more months of this, slowly weaning her on to more and more food each day, it got to the point where she was so large that she could barely stand. She no longer complained to me of her increasing size. She began to look on it with pride, for she could tell that I was truly in love with her body. I am sure that she began to see through my lies, my obvious extra meals to help her with her growing fatigue, the sugary food that I would give her claiming it would give her energy. She must have known that I wasn't telling the truth. Perhaps she could have saved herself, told me no, and simply got on with it and lost weight like many people do. But I suppose it is too late now. Last night, she was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. The doctors also found her blood pressure to be 180/120. I feel completely distraught, and I have never felt more guilty in my life. Whenever I look into her swollen face, I need to stop myself from sobbing, looking on what I have done. I just don't know what to do anymore. I feel like I have murdered my wife. I was seeing a fake psychologist for years. For some context, I had a really crappy childhood. It was terrible, where I don't remember anything from birth all the way to 13 years of age. Everything I know about what happened through those years was from a mixture of sparse memories, things my family have told me about myself, and police reports. One of those things I do remember, however, is this lady I called Auntie. No first name, no last name, nothing else contributing to her identity. She was just Auntie. I started seeing her when I was 7 years old, sitting in her living room as she typed everything I said down on her laptop. I had no problem with her. I saw her once every month, and she seemed gentle enough that I really thought that she was someone I could trust. So I did. 7 years later, when I was 14, I admitted to her that I had dark thoughts numerous times. It was a mixture of multiple different factors: my mother's increasing toxicity, the lack of social interaction at the time, and more importantly, I never moved on from the horrors in my childhood. Now, I was 14 years old at the time, and I was able to wonder why these meetings with Auntie never actually seemed to help me, especially to do with the fact that I begged her to tell me why I constantly had dark thoughts. I remember on the way to Auntie's house, I asked my mother if I would ever get the chance to see a different person, maybe get a different sort of help that Auntie clearly couldn't give. I was just hissed at to be quiet. Around that time, the relationship between me and my mother began to crack. My mother became a source of grief to me, and I cried about it during multiple sessions with my auntie. Auntie at the end of these sessions would try to defend my mother or make me seem like I'm blowing things out of proportion. I tried to come up with my own reasons at the time on why she was not trying to understand things wholly, and I chalked it up to her being empathetic. Maybe being able to explain why my mother was terrible was supposed to help me embrace it in some weird way, and then more things like that seemed to happen. I admit that when I was 16 years old, I was a terrible kid. I went to parties, drank whatever was served, and definitely did not tell anyone what I was doing. But then Auntie started to ask very specific questions, especially to the topics mentioned above. I was in shock. Again, I gave her the benefit of the doubt and thought that her sudden pinpointing of these things must be from the fact that at this point, she's known me for almost a decade. All the way into a year later, she started to bring up the parties I've gone to in these sessions, without even bothering to hide behind questions. The relationship between me and my mother had almost been completely severed, and the worst part of all, something that still affects me till this day. At the end of each session, Auntie had started to invite my mother into the room and tell her every single thing I said. It was terrible. Hearing my own words against my mother, explaining the increasing abuse that she has begun to put me through, said straight to her face as she sat next to me. My grades in school began to drop. My mother forbade me from going out, and I was completely isolated. So I tried to act on my dark thoughts on my 17th birthday. I ran into my mother's room looking for something that I could overdose with, or just something that could push me to the edge. I remember rummaging through everything until I went into her walk-in closet. I had barely gone into her room. In fact, I completely forgot about the fact that she even had one of these. In my crazed state, I just remember running into her closet and looking through every crevice. I stumbled upon a suitcase leaning against the wall under the hung-up clothes. If I close my eyes, I can still imagine it. It didn't look old, so that was probably what made me decide to open it up. When I did, all I saw was a crap ton of papers. The surprise of seeing so much snapped me out of the state I was in. I recall sitting cross-legged on the floor and wondering what the hell these papers were. After a while of reading, I realized that these were transcripts of Auntie and I's sessions, literally dating all the way back to some of the first sessions that I did. I remember feeling sick, feeling so sick. I at least had enough sense to steal a few of the earlier papers to make it less noticeable. Reading through those transcripts just filled me up with more and more bitter questions, and I decided that night that I would act on my dark thoughts after what I figured out what was going on. I was on a time crunch, feeling stressed, because I really only had a year left to figure out what the hell was going on before I was faced with the looming threat of being kicked out as soon as I turned 18. I started to pay way more attention in our sessions, looking around her house whenever I got the chance to, looking for some indicators that could tell me who this psychologist really was. I started asking my mother more and more questions about Auntie, and she kept deflecting, repeating the same fact. She was a psychologist. That's until I did something that literally almost ruined the rest of my life. I decided to steal my mother's phone. It seems like a small thing now, but then it was really life or death. My mother was in the shower, and I had already packed all the stuff I needed to be out for a few hours, maybe even for a few nights somewhere. As soon as I heard the door lock, I swiped my mother's phone and bolted out the house. I didn't even look down at the damn thing until I was on the bus. I remember looking through my mother's messages first, and I knew I found Auntie when I stumbled across an unfamiliar name. Even better, when the messages clearly showed when my mother booked appointments. I scrolled up for a while, enough for the bus to get me to a safe place. But even as I walked off the bus and years of texts were read, nothing incriminating had shown itself. I then looked through my mother's call logs, and I saw the fact that they call extremely often. I wasn't an idiot. Whatever was really going on was happening on calls instead of messages, which was smart. I'll give credit where credit is due, but it still didn't get me anything. I found a place to sit at on the side of the road, and I continued my search. I looked through my mother's social media, and when I tried searching up Auntie's name, nothing came up. I genuinely felt all hope leave my body then, and sometimes now I swear I can still feel the same sick feeling as I felt then. I almost gave up. Almost. Every day I thank myself for mindlessly swiping through my mother's followers, because I found her. Her account name didn't have her real name, some weird fake one. But when I clicked on her profile, it was most definitely her. She posted photos with some of my mother's friends, and I scrolled for a while down her page until I saw a photo that I posted of herself and my mother. Years ago. They have literally been friends even before I was born. I felt sick, betrayed, and a bit relieved that I now knew what the hell was going on. Why my mother had transcripts. Why Auntie didn't think twice before telling my mother every single thing I said. Why she defended her. I didn't even bother to find a place to stay that night. I just went back home. I got beat black and blue for doing something that didn't deserve any forgiveness. It didn't hurt at all compared to what I found out earlier that day. All I asked my mother that night is, who is Auntie really? And she couldn't even answer that. A few years later, I was in my first year of university. I had the lucky chance to move out of my mother's house as soon as I got the chance to, with an old friend taking pity on me and allowing me to stay with him since we applied to the same university. He's one of my best friends now. What finally gave me closure in some bittersweet way, clearing out my Instagram. I deleted people that I didn't care about or didn't know. My heart dropped when I saw a familiar username in my followers. I didn't think about it at all when I searched up the username in the search bar and when it came up with Auntie's Facebook account. This psycho had been following me for God knows how long on my Instagram. And suddenly, everything that didn't click finally made sense. The sudden, precise questions. Why my mother suddenly decided to isolate me from my friends. It didn't even say psychologist or anything of the sort in her bio. Tell me why it said chemistry teacher with over 20 years. F my life. I admit that I cried like a baby that night because it had taken years for me to finally understand why two of my main female models seemed to despise me. Still to this day, I mourn the fact that most of my early adult years are being used to heal from everything in my childhood, instead of going out with newly made friends and giving my all to university. It sucks. Everyone who hears my life story agrees on the fact that there's something wrong with them. I just wished I knew that sooner. 2 days ago, I had my first session with a real psychologist. Trust me, I did my research. I felt almost ashamed when I blurted out the reason why I'm sitting in this guy's chair. But he just smiled and told me we had a lot of work to do. Yeah, we do, LOL. I decided to post about my experience just in the slight chance anyone had a similar experience with therapy becoming screwed up, or they feel like they've been living in a hole their entire life. I promise you guys, it gets better, with a little luck, and surrounding yourself with the right people at least. Before I tell my story, I just want to say, I'm aware of how dumb it is to do stuff like this, and I probably won't be doing this for a long time after what happened a few months ago. Anyway, I just really needed to post this because I don't know who else to tell. About half a year ago, I had the scariest experience of my life. For context, I'm a dumb teenage boy who sneaks out every now and then just to walk around at night. I find something very peaceful walking around after dark, but my parents have never let me stay out past sunset. So for about a year, whenever school gets hard or just life in general gets stressful, I sneak out and just walk around for about 2 hours or so. Anyway, the night I'm talking about began with me deciding to go for another 2 a.m. ritual. I grabbed a sweatshirt, got on my shoes, and once I was outside and hopped the fence to freedom. After I was safely away from my neighborhood, I took one of my usual routes, which is cutting through another neighborhood and walking onto a winding road, where I then walk down the middle of it and head towards a circle of shops and fast food restaurants. I was probably there for a solid chunk of time, just walking in the loop and ending up sitting on a bench. At some point, I picked up a plastic spoon on the ground and started to grind it against the pavement until the spoon part was half gone out of boredom. This is important later. I was chilling there for a bit before I decided to walk around a bit more, and I eventually ended up at a park like 10 minutes away from my neighborhood, where I usually end off the night just staring off into the sky. The park itself creeps me out sometimes, because at night there's a huge ring of trees surrounding all sides of you, and anyone could watch from the woods. Anyway, stuff starts to get real here, because I'm staring up into existence feeling like a philosopher, while I'm laying on one of those table benches when I hear an old man whistle. I probably shot up because I had never had another human interaction on these walks. and I see this old man dimly illuminated by a streetlight by the only entrance of the park. I had seen him before. He's this tall, skinny white guy that walks around our town all day, and I would honestly think he was homeless if he wasn't wearing the same fancy button-up and cargo pants every day. Me and my mum have talked about him, and we think he's mentally disabled and probably lives with a caretaker. I had an interaction with him once. About a year ago, I was walking home in broad daylight when I passed the man who was at that time sitting on a bench. Dude just looks at me and says, "Jesus loves you," with a weird little smirk on his face. I responded with an awkward, "I know," even though I'm an atheist and didn't really think much of it. Anyway, back to the park at night. I just stare at him in that empty parking lot probably way longer than I should have because he was already creeping me the hell out. I imagine we were staring at each other for a real long time before he slowly starts walking toward me. And at this point I'm frozen in fear because why the hell is this old white geezer out with me at like 3 a.m. in an empty park? I'm standing up at this point when he gets close to me and just gives me this cheeky grin like he knows something I don't yet, and I'm still just gawking at him like a buffoon. Have you ever scoffed at a book or movie when the main character is frozen in fear? Well, I have, and I never will again because at this point I'm more frozen than I've ever been in my life. At some point after probably like 10 seconds of awkward standing, he just kinda half pats and half grabs my shoulder and reaches into his pocket to pull out a plastic spoon. The same plastic spoon that I was holding about an hour ago at the shop plaza. He just kinda tucks it in my front sweatshirt pocket, and I guess something just makes my mind snap out of my frozen stance, because I absolutely book it to the public bathroom and lock the door. I'm now in this dimly lit bathroom in the middle of the night, and I'm guessing at this time it was past 3 in the morning. I assumed that maybe he would leave once he saw me in my state of panic, but honestly, I don't think he ever left. I ended up looking closer at the plastic spoon, and it was altered. Have you seen that one viral AI-generated image where it looks completely normal at a glance, but you can't identify a single thing? If not, just search up, name one thing in this image. Now imagine that except a word carved onto a plastic spoon, but you can't read it, or even identify any of the letters. I think I sat in that locked bathroom for over half an hour, just contemplating every single decision I've made in the past year that lead up to the nightmare I was in at that moment. To be clear, I had no phone or any way of contacting someone because my parents installed Life 360 on my phone, and they can see my location whenever. I also had no watch or access to the outside to tell the time. I ended up gaining the courage to unlock the door and just absolutely rocket myself towards the exit of the park. Before I turned the corner, I looked back for a second and saw a figure sitting on the bench that was right next to the bathroom. This senile old man had waited outside for an hour just to see me one more time. I'm being completely honest when I say I held a full sprint until I got to my neighborhood, where I caught my breath behind a bush and then snuck back in my house. I haven't gone out at night since that experience, and I don't know if I'll ever sneak out again. I still have the spoon buried somewhere in my wardrobe, but I haven't looked at it in months. Sometimes I think about how long he was following me, and if it was an isolated incident, or if he had been stalking me on other late-night trips. I would love to hear your guys' opinion on the matter, unless you're here to lecture me about my actions, because trust me, I've already learned. Users in the replies ask OP to post a picture of the spoon he kept in his wardrobe, and he obliges. Here is the picture he provided. Thank you to everyone who watched to the very end. This is my very first video, and if you enjoyed it, leaving a like and a subscription is very much appreciated. Or, if you have any criticisms, leave them in the comments. I appreciate those as well. Good night, everyone.